This video is sponsored by Crunchyroll. Before we get into some terrifying monster sightings, I've just got to share one of my new favorite anime with you. It's an anime that will disturb you to your core. It's like a Japanese Final Destination. It's called Another. Another is about a cursed classroom at a middle school with a dark past. If the people in that class do not completely ignore the existence of another student in the class, the curse will activate, leading to the gruesome deaths of all of them one by one. Another is full of suspense, terror, and gory death scenes. I highly recommend it to any horror fan. As always, Another is available at crunchyroll.com, the best platform for anime that is professionally subtitled, high definition, and available on all your devices. Plus, new episodes even air as soon as an hour after they air in Japan. I've always been an anime fan due to its detailed art style and bizarre storylines, and I love sharing my favorites with you guys. So, if you want a month of free anime like this one, all you gotta do is go to crunchyroll.com/darkness. Thanks, Crunchyroll. So I've been all over the place with my latest videos, from creepy fairies to foreign ghost stories. I think it's a good time to get back to my roots, so I bring you good old American monster stories. Enjoy these 5 allegedly real American monster sightings. Oh, and please do send me your Costco scary stories if you've got them. Thanks. Number 1. The White Mountain Hound. Submitted by SOVIETDAN. I've always considered myself a nature lover. I've been hunting since I was 9 with my father. He's taught me everything I know, from hunting tricks to guns. Telling this story continues to give me chills up my spine, and I try to keep it out of my head. But I feel I need to share my experience and warn anyone in New Hampshire of what I saw. I'm 19 now, but when I was 16, my parents usually let me hunt alone since I could drive. I drove a 2006 Chevy Silverado. I usually bring my Winchester rifle with enough ammo to bring down at least a deer. It had to have been around 12 noon. I parked my truck, gathered my things together, and I set off into the New Hampshire White Mountains. Nothing about that day at the time seemed wrong, and I definitely didn't expect anything of what I experienced that day. I trailed up maybe 3 hours into the woods, in woods that I know really well. By maybe 3 or 4 p.m., I was tracking a deer. I didn't know the size, I just followed fresh tracks for maybe 2 miles. By the time the sun began to set, maybe 5 or 6, that's when things became off. I never hunt in the night, and I don't hunt in the mornings, so I decided to head back to my truck. This is the part I wish I kept moving, so that I might have never seen this. But as I was maybe less than an hour from the trail, I stopped at a rock and took a drink, and I placed my rifle next to me. As I took a small swig of my drink, I remember hearing leaves being moved around. The sound was coming from up in front of me, up a hillside covered by heavy brush. I thought I got lucky, so I raised my rifle quickly, keeping the crosshairs in the direction of the noise. There was also a clearing there, and I expected to take a clean shot if it ever moved into that open space. But as whatever it was moved into view, my heart dropped, and what I remember seeing was nothing but something from the depths of hell. I stood there with my eyes wide open and my heart racing as I stared at a large creature standing on all fours. It seemed to have gray-reddish fur. Its snout was long, and I remember seeing long teeth protruding from between the lips. In less than a moment, it noticed me standing there, watching it. It turned its head and stared me dead in the eyes, and almost immediately, I began to tear up. This was like nothing I've ever seen before. I totally forgot I had a gun, and once it took its first step to me, it snarled, showing each of its teeth. Facing a horror I never thought I'd see in my life, I dropped my gun, and I ran. As I ran, I'm sure I heard this thing give chase, and I never ran so fast in my life. My heart was racing, and I didn't run out of breath for a second. It must have been the adrenaline, because I honestly thought I was going to die. I remember running up a hill and feeling a paw or something try to scratch at my ankle. I was whimpering and screaming the moment it touched me. I know this story sounds crazy, but I've never been so scared. I heard something growl behind me, and I could hear leaves crunching under something's heavy weight. I never turned around, being so mentally afraid and paranoid of being face to face with this thing. Once I reached the trail, still crying and eyes flooding, I remember I couldn't see much, but once I reached the parking lot and dove into my car, nearly hitting myself with the door, I fumbled my keys trying to start my truck, screaming at myself to hurry. I think there were 2 other cars in the parking lot at that time, but no other people. I remember slamming on the gas before I even put my seatbelt on, and I didn't flip on the headlights until I was gone. I flew down the dirt road that connects to the main road, not seeing anyone until I made it to the center of my small town of Jackson. I ran 2 red lights, and I pulled into my driveway, running to my house, leaving the keys in my car. I even left the door open, so paranoid that something followed me home. When I ran in all panicked, my parents were of course dead confused, but at the very least, they could see that I was terrified. I was still tearing up, and I wanted them to lock all the doors and to keep them closed. I was such a nervous wreck that my parents had to force me down onto the sofa. I'm pretty sure it took at least 20 more minutes after that just to calm me down. Once I told them everything that I saw, they said that it was probably a bear or some sort of dog, but the image of this thing has been seared into my mind. I know better than to think it was a bear or dog. What I saw, I'll never unsee. Mock me if you want, but I slept in my parents' bedroom, and I kept a pistol on the nightstand just in case. The doors remained locked. I probably freaked my parents out, and I didn't sleep at all that night. When morning finally came, my father said that he and his buddies would go where I saw this creature and get my stuff, and maybe even see if they could find it and hunt it down. But I begged them not to go. I followed him to his truck and begged him, but he wouldn't listen. They left and found my things. They said they found tracks and my footprints. They said that the tracks looked dog-like, and they were mishmashed with mine, all the way up to that hill where it nearly grabbed me. They said my bag looked like something went through it and chewed all the things up, but my rifle was still there unscathed. Yet they never saw or heard what I saw. I still remember the sounds that thing made, and it's been 3 years later. To this day, I refuse to hunt up there. In fact, as I'm writing this, there have been sightings of what I saw up close. I'm sorry I couldn't put more detail into what I saw, but it happened so fast. I'm sharing this to warn people. I'm begging you to be careful when you go into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I've seen pictures of the tracks of this creature, and I can guarantee you it's more than a dog. I refuse to go back. Even now when I tell this story, I have chills up and down me, and I feel so paranoid. I hope I never see the White Mountain Hound again. Number 2. Creepy Creatures. Submitted by Jennifer W. I'm 32 years old, and all of this happened when I was a child. It was always in the middle of the night. In my parents' house, there was about a 20 feet long hallway, and my room was at the very end of it. My bed was against the wall, and I was facing the doorway. I had a nightlight in my room, and I left my bedroom door open at night because I didn't want these things to come into my room. You see, when I was 5 and over the next several years, I saw creatures that I'm not sure my innocent, childlike mind could conjure up. I would see them in the middle of the night, and I know when I saw them I wasn't asleep or in some sort of sleep paralysis. I've experienced sleep paralysis, but this was different, as I could move. I'll try to give details as to what they looked like, at least the ones I can easily remember. I can't remember the exact order of their appearances. The first I will tell you about is what I call the tar creature. It was standing in the hallway. I couldn't really tell what the creature was. It probably stood 5 feet tall, and it had its arms stretched out at its sides, and it looked as if globs of thick oil or tar were dripping off of it. And even worse, it looked enraged as it stared at me. It didn't move at all, it just stood there, angrily. There was another that appeared to be a shadow that danced along the walls, and when I saw it, I sat up for a minute and watched it, before jumping out of bed and running to my parents' room in sheer terror. One night, when I had walked into my parents' room to sleep with them, there was a small man sitting on their bed. He was a dwarf in size. I remember being confused when I walked in, wondering, who is that? I just tried to lay down between my parents and ignore it. It was hard to ignore when this thing poked its sharp fingernail into my back and said,
"I want to talk to you."
But I continued to pretend it wasn't there. I've even seen two creatures in the reflection of my parents' mirror, but they're impossible to explain. One night when I walked into my parents' room again, yes, I was very terrified all the time of these things, and so I slept with them a lot. I laid down in their bed, and as I looked towards the doorway, these two things came walking in. I'm shivering just talking about it. I could hear their footsteps on my parents' wood floor. They were humanoid, but their heads were really strange. They were round on top, and when it reached their neck, it was like the bottom of a lampshade, if that makes any sense. I couldn't make out any of their facial features. They were like shadow people. They walked in, and I watched them as they tapped on my mother's shoulder, and they called her Mom, but it sounded like me. Then I heard one of them say,
"She isn't waking up."
And then I heard them walk out. The next day my mom said she had heard and felt something in the middle of the night, but she wasn't able to open her eyes. One night I woke up, and I could hear the obvious sound of someone talking. But it sounded so inhuman, like two aliens talking to one another. It was garbled and terrifying. There are many other things that I saw, but unfortunately I cannot remember all of them. I used to cry and pray to God that I would not see these things anymore. To this very day, I have absolutely no idea what these things were, or where they came from. I was always too afraid to confront them. But I still want to know, and I'll probably always wonder. It was like living in a haunted house, but instead of the usual human-looking ghosts, I was haunted by monsters. I can't be thankful enough that I no longer see them, and I hope it stays that way. Number 3. Sniffles. Submitted by Jay. Before I begin, I'll tell you this. This does not involve an attack. There was no Ouija board or any of that spooky stuff. And when I was 4, it started, but when I was 7, it stopped. I'm 13 now. So when I was a little kid, and up until a year back, we had a dog. She was a medium-sized lab beagle mix, and she had a tendency to snort a little bit. Her name was Haley. I was an imaginative kid, and I still am, and I had and have insomnia. Now, one night I was lying awake, trying to get to sleep, when this silhouette came up next to my bed. It was the same size as Haley, so I just sort of glanced at it. Now the thing about Haley is that she would come into my room and lay down next to my bed, and when she got to her spot she'd do that little spinny thing that dogs do before lying down, but this shadow just stood there. I obviously didn't think this was odd, because I didn't notice Haley's behavior back then. It stayed there for about 15 minutes, with me just staring at it, and then it left. I didn't hear Haley's nails though, which I only remember when I look back on it, and I finally fell asleep at about 1 in the morning. About 2 nights from that, the thing I thought was Haley came back. This time I got nervous though, not a little bit either, like really, really nervous. It stood there again, and I stared at it. I've never been that still in my life. I'm not even joking. It stayed for a little longer, and then left again, and I eventually fell asleep. I didn't tell Mom and Dad about this. A week later, in my own bed again, I heard some kind of noise from the hallway, like a kind of sweeping noise. Still lying down, I looked into the hallway, and I saw a black thing, totally covered in long, matted hair. This was bad, because my dog has short fur and was yellow, but this thing was either black or brown. I couldn't even see its legs. Its hair was trailing onto the floor, and I couldn't see any eyes. The only thing without hair was some kind of weird pseudo-trunk thing, only it didn't have the open part at the end. It looked like it had been amputated. I hid under the blanket with only my eyes peeking out, and I saw this thing move into my doorway. It got halfway in the door, and just stared straight ahead at my wall. I heard some sort of weird snorting noise, but it was coming from whatever was in the doorway, and Haley had been in the living room all night. I heard it sniffing and something that sounded like a quiet sob. The thing was crying. I sat there and just stared at it, and it felt like it was staring back at me. I wanted to call for my mom, but I couldn't say a word, and I could barely move. The thing sounded so sad, and then it did what still scares me breathless. It moved right next to my bed. It was at that moment that my 4-year-old mind clicked, and I realized that the thing that had been standing by my bed all those nights was not my dog. I watched it move right up next to the bed, and it turned its head to look right at me. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I could hardly breathe. I couldn't talk, I couldn't blink. I could see whatever it was shiver a bit. Then its breath hitched, and it began sobbing again. It sounded like some other kid, a little boy now that I think about it. The thing just looked at me, and I think it stood there the whole damn night. And I got absolutely no sleep. The same thing kept happening for years, and I never told a soul. I learned to hide completely under my blanket and to not move, no matter how much I panicked. It stopped a few months before my 8th birthday. I've told my best friend about this last year, and I only told my parents after a huge panic attack. I had developed anxiety not too long after, maybe a coincidence. I've called this thing Sniffles, because there's really nothing else I can call it. And whenever I hear something crying, I still get nervous, and I try to avoid anything with long fur or a trunk. And from there on out, I've always slept with a nightlight. Hopefully the light will keep it away. Number 4. What did I see? Submitted by METALWOLF. My name is Sasha, and I'm from a small town in New Hampshire called Chesterfield. I don't currently reside there, but that's where this story takes place. This happened when I was about 15. I was hanging out with some friends in a town across the Connecticut River in Vermont called Brattleboro. Once it got late, everyone went home, and I was stuck in town without a way home. Chesterfield was maybe 7 or 8 miles away. It was summer, so I figured screw it, I'll just walk. Once you leave Brattleboro, it's a straight shot up Route 9 to Chesterfield. To get to my house, I had to take a left onto this road that cuts through a field where the Chesterfield Inn sits. That road always creeped me out, even in the daytime. It just never felt right, like you were being watched. But like it or not, I had to go down that road. About halfway in, I noticed what looked like a man standing on the other side of the guardrail. He appeared to be looking at the inn off in the distance. I didn't really think too much of it, because people would walk this road all the time. But it was about 2 or 3 in the morning, and most of the people who lived on this street were fairly old, so it was really odd to see someone out this late. But again, I tried to brush it off, and I kept walking. It was very bright out thanks to the full moon, so vision wasn't an issue. When I finally got about 20 feet away from this man, I started to notice how odd he looked. He was pitch black, completely black like a shadow, and he was very tall, at least 7 feet, and he didn't have any distinguishing facial features, as if he didn't have a mouth or nose at all. And he appeared to have long hair blowing about, but there was no wind. He was very thin yet muscular at the same time. As I was taking this all in, I was moving closer as well. I was maybe 12 feet away from this thing now, without him noticing me. He just kept staring at the inn. Kind of freaked out, I just decided to get his attention and get it over with. So I said, "Hello." He turned, looking at me, revealing his eyes that shined bright yellow, not like the reflective traits of cats' or dogs' eyes. It was more like they were lit up with electricity. This scared the crap out of me. What he did next was probably the most disturbing and confusing thing of all. I'll do my best to describe what I saw. He turned away from the guardrail, leapt forward, and disappeared. He didn't simply vanish like smoke. He more walked through an invisible door. I couldn't speak. I just ran until I couldn't anymore, being creeped out the whole rest of the way. Needless to say, I did not sleep much that night, and to this day I have no idea what this thing was. I believe what I saw was a demon. That was 15 years ago, and every day since then I still wonder, what was the creature I saw? And number 5, they are always watching. Submitted by Ella. I am 18 years old and I live in Arizona. I'm a full-blooded Cherokee Indian, so I'm no stranger to stories about these skinwalkers. My grandfather always warned me about them, saying they'd love to get a hold of me and my friends. I'm very open-minded when it comes to things like this, but I must say, even this may be hard to believe, but I swear it really happened. I was upstairs in my room and I woke up to my phone going off. It was my friend Kinsey. She had texted me asking if I wanted to sneak out to go to the park with her. I of course said no, because it was only 6 o'clock in the morning. A few minutes later she said, "Well, I guess you're going to miss out on all the fun with Chris and Logan." My heart skipped a beat when I read this, because Chris and Logan are the hottest guys in school. So foolishly I text her back, saying that I'll be outside in 20. She lives down the road from me. After I got dressed, I sprayed on my favorite perfume and put on my favorite lip gloss, just in case. I opened my window and she was there waiting for me. Chris and Logan were with her. I called down, "Hey, how are you guys?" They all say, "Good," and Chris asked if I needed help getting down. I said sure. I laughed and blushed. I shimmied myself out onto the roof. He said, "Come on, I promise I'll catch you." I hate heights, so I pretty much had to force myself to jump. But when I did, I felt Chris's hands grasp me. He put me down, and we made our way to the park. On the way, both of the guys were staring at me, and I personally didn't care because they were attractive. Keep in mind, I am very developed for my age, and Kinsey is pretty skinny. I felt kind of bad because Kinsey was kind of forgotten about, so I decided to ask her what time it was. She said it was 6:18. We arrived around 6:30, and I was pretty excited. There are woods next to the park, and we went into them. Needless to say, we began to get a little feisty. Chris and I began to kiss, when we suddenly heard a sort of moan. It sounded like a cry of pain, but it wasn't human. It sounded demonic, to be honest. We became still and quiet, waiting for another sound. Then this cackle came out of nowhere, and we heard heavy, loud footsteps approaching us fast. There was no pattern. They were just jumbled and discorded. At this point, the sun was beginning to shine down. We saw this dog. It was massive. It just looked at us. But there was something off about this dog. I kept looking at it and noticed that its huge eyes weren't like a dog's sweet brown eyes. They looked more complex, like a human's. I could even see the whites of them. It stared at each of us, one after the other, over and over. It was sneering at us. So me being an animal lover, I said to it, "Hey, big guy, It interrupted me with the most evil, ear-piercing howl. It sounded like a screaming woman with static and deep growls at the same time. It sent chills to my core and all over my body. I looked behind me and Chris's face was as white as snow. The dog then ran away, and we all watched it, noticing that it didn't have a tail at all. Not like it was amputated, more like it was never there at all. And then the smell hit. I can't even begin to describe what it smelled like. All I can say is it smelled of death. Kinsey threw up because it was so putrid, and we all decided it was time to go. We noped the hell out of there and began running back to the park. As we were running, we heard that ear-piercing howl again. It was so freaking loud. I started to cry. There was no way of knowing if it was following us, if it wanted to hurt us. Luckily, we made it back to Kinsey's house after 10 minutes of sprinting. I threw up in her yard from running so hard. Chris walked me back to my house, and again, lucky for me, my mom had gone to work and never checked to see if I was still in my room. Later on, I told my grandpa about this experience, and he said that it must have been a skinwalker. He blessed me and my friends and gave us all silver. Skinwalkers hate silver, and we never spoke of it again. I was 16 at the time, and Chris and I are now living together. That thing, it's still out there, and I just know some poor souls are going to have the same thing happen to them. I just pray that that thing goes back to hell where it belongs. America is simply massive. Foreigners often make the mistake of understanding just how big it is. When thousands of your own people get lost in their woods every year, it just goes to show you how easily it could happen to you. Even if you aren't in the woods, there might just be something in your home that would happily drag you into them. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget, send me your Costco scary stories, and check out crunchyroll.com/darkness for a month of free creepy anime. Thanks.